Death, the final frontier. This is the moment when your character passes beyond your grasp. This should be about more than rolls of dice. This should be about more than charted metrics. This should be a moment when all of your investment, backstory, and input comes to a close. It should be upsetting. And as a player, you should feel this. And as a DM, you should want this from your players. So in today's episode, we're talking about death and dying. And can we make this more flavorful for your table? Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where every week, Garrett and I take a ruler mechanic in the game of D&D that's lackluster or needs improvement, and we offer you advice on how to make your game around that rule more interesting or more fun. So, sharpen up those daggers. We're getting started right now. All right, everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance. We are going to be talking today about the topic of death and dying. And we have a special guest with us today. Rich Froman is here. Yes. How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. I'd like to thank my mom, my dad, and my grandma.
You're welcome.
Which one of those are you? Grandma, is that you?
Grandma? So, as you know, we kind of always cover a topic on this podcast that, you know, we've gone over things like critical strikes, we've gone over armor class. A lot of those have not made it to the podcast sphere yet. Mm-hmm. This one finally will. We're actually going to put this one out there as one of our podcasts because we've been warming up to the topic, or warming up to the whole production, I should say. But I thought death and dying is a great place to start for us, right? Because
start from the end?
So we're going to start at the end.
Because it happens all the time.
Well, I don't know if it happens all the time, but I think one thing that's really important is I think that death and dying are the motivators for player investment and agency in this game, right? Which is a big, as you know, is a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Garrett, when we deal with death and dying in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, how does it work? Let's just start from the beginning.
Let's shoot out the rules as written from 5e Dungeons & Dragons. When you drop to 0 hit points, you either die outright or fall unconscious. Instant death would be the massive damage can kill you instantly. When damage reduces you to 0 hit points, if the remaining damage equals or exceeds your hit point maximum, you instantly die. That would be you're out. You're done.
Right.
You need to be revived.
So to contextualize that, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, if your character has 30 hit points and then you take 60 points of damage, which would reduce you to obviously 0 and then to negative 30, thus going negative your maximum hit points, you're instantly killed. Death saving throws are off the table.
It has happened. We have experienced it.
We have.
Adding on to the rules, falling unconscious. If damage reduces you to 0 hit points and it doesn't instantly kill you, as the example we just said, you fall unconscious. This unconsciousness ends if you regain any hit points. During so, on each subsequent turn, you make a death saving throw or death saving roll. So whenever you start your turn with 0 hit points, you must make a death saving throw. To determine whether you creep closer to death or hang on to life, roll a d20. If the roll is 10 or higher, you succeed. Otherwise, you fail. On a third success, you became stable. On a third failure, you die.
Right.
And just the last point, the number of both is reset to 0 when you regain any hit points or become stabilized.
Right. And as we all know, this system is both a little broken, and there's been a ton of homebrew created around it to give it, to nuance it, right?
Yeah,
because it feels a little underwhelming. You have, time before you essentially die, and any amount of healing or aspect can just bring you right back to life.
Right.
With no underlying consequence.
And this is the big problem that I have as somebody who really loves the notion of storytelling. The problem that I have is the place where the mechanics of dice rolling and rules meets the reality of roleplay and storytelling often bang up against one another. And we have to find a way to allow those two to overlap in a believable way.
100%.
And this is where we have an issue, right?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. If you're in a movie and somebody gets knocked unconscious, there's usually repercussions.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Exactly. So there is not some force that leaps them back to their feet and puts them in full-fledged combat again.
No,
That's
no
just
way.
not the way it works.
Not at all.
Right.
Yeah. You're knocked out, you're unconscious, you get stabbed or whatever.
But think about it. If you take that and you don't shy away from it and not acknowledge it, if you acknowledge it and make it part of the story and you give lasting consequences, that person might go on a revenge plot to find the man that took his eye out. You know what I mean? Or something.
Are you saying something, Rich?
Who took my eye?
Maybe not an eye, but maybe something else.
Maybe.
So for me, a lot of this has to do with how it's made meaningful, but we can wait to get to that because I think there's a lot of places where we can talk about how this system of death and dying has changed through either the different editions of Dungeons and Dragons, potentially through other TTRPGs. So where do we see differences in this that you can think of? I have one in mind that I can talk about, but do you have any on the tip of your tongue?
I mean, if you've got it, go.
Okay.
What's yours?
Okay. So one condition that, if for any of those of you who have been playing this game for a while, I think we know that one of the more heavily nuanced versions of the game was Dungeons and Dragons 4E. 4E has so many individual little mechanics in it that if you've never played before and that's the first book you look at, you're going to be completely overwhelmed. But there is one condition in the game of D&D 4E where it's introduced for the first time called bloodied. Now we know bloodied as 5E players because bloodied comes into play mostly in the context of monsters. Because if a character is engaged in combat and they want to assess the condition of their enemy, they're going to say to the DM, how's he looking? Like, how much have I hit him? Because, if you're hitting something that you really don't know what hit points they have left, you don't know where you stand. Bloodied is a condition in 5e that means the monster has fallen to half their hit points or below. Okay. Now, on some level, this is a direct mechanic that is just a descriptor, right? However, there's a lot more to it than that. Now, in 4E, bloodied also pertained to the player character, which was kind of interesting. So if you got to bloodied, right, there were some things that were about to happen. So number one, in 5e, instant death occurs when you fall to a negative version of your maximum hit points, like I described below. You have 30 hit points, someone does 60 points of damage to you, you're dead instantly. They rip your head right off. In 4e, instant death occurred when you fell to the negative version of your bloodied status. So if you have 30 hit points, like in my before example, you're bloodied at 15 hit points. And if you fall to negative 15 hit points, that's instant death.
Wow.
They literally doubled it.
They doubled it. Correct.
They made it so much safer.
However, they didn't make it safer because there were some elements on the other end of the game in 4E that made it harder. So for example, when you did engage in death saving throws in 4E, there was only failure. There was no success. So if you rolled a 1 through, I'm going to say it was 9. It might have been 1 through 10, but I think it was 1 through 9 on a D20. You failed, right? And then 3 failures equaled death. But if you rolled a 10 through 20, nothing happened. Okay. And you did not regain hit points until you took a long rest. So imagine being in a long-term combat where every turn you're rolling a death saving throw, potentially adding up 3 failures. Your death could come very quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a lot harder in 4E for a number of reasons. Now, to be fair, also in 4E, if you rolled a 20 or above, which does hint towards being able to apply modifiers to death saving throws, which is not a normal thing, then you set yourself back to 0 hit points and you were stable.
Okay.
So there was a way to stabilize yourself, but not by gaining 3 successes.
Correct.
Like the new rule.
That's correct.
I mean, thematically, that's a lot more interesting because it's either I am bleeding out for a long period of time or I'm just unconscious and I'm going to be okay.
But
either way, you have to get checked on by your friends.
Yeah, but you still have 3 failures or death.
Yeah.
So it's still, and the fact that if you're reduced only by half of what the new rule is, you're out.
Yeah.
That's a lot closer to death, I feel, than how it's set up now.
I agree.
I think that's where Rich was saying how they made it easier is more the 5e.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Right. I wasn't catching what you were saying.
You were, He was talking about 5e, how it's easier.
So much easier.
And I think that's why people homebrew 5e a lot more is because it feels underwhelming or not as impactful. Death.
And you said you can't get hit points back until a long rest?
Well, there are ways, obviously. There are other ways where you can be healed.
Essentially you have to heal to get out of the having to roll is what I'm picking up from that.
Yeah.
Having to roll your death saves.
Okay. So so to actually wake up and like do what you do in D&D 5e where like if you wake up, you're just back in a battle. To be able to do that, you have to get healed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Essentially.
You can't do it yourself.
That's what I'm picking up.
Yeah, I believe that's right. Now, I haven't played a lot of 4E. I've read a lot about 4E. So, as with anything, I think the knowledge comes to you in practice. So my book knowledge of this might not be as complete. So, chastise me in the comments, if you will, if I'm wrong. So there's a couple of other things I think we should talk about here. Did you have one? You were looking at Pathfinder, I think.
Well, before we swing back to 5e, let's, add a little Pathfinder. You just added a little 4e. I found a homebrew idea or a modification to 5e that essentially brings in a rule from Pathfinder 2e called the wounded condition. So it's essentially as you're downed in combat, Pathfinder has rules of dying, and it's on the concept of saves, but they have different levels of dying, 1, 2, 3, etc. I won't get too deep into that, but it's a wounded condition where if you're downed and then brought back up in combat, you keep the wounded condition so that if you are downed again, you would start off with a failed death save. So bringing it into 5e, we're dropped to 0 hit points. You're making your saves as normal. The cleric brings you back up. You're back in the battle. Your fails and saves, are set back to 0. But you gain the wounded 1 condition.
Right.
So now if I'm dropped again in that same combat, I would start off my rolls with 1 failed death save because I have the wounded 1 condition. And if you're brought back up that second time, your wounded value would increase to a wounded 2, and so on and so forth. So if you drop again and then are brought back up, you're at a wounded 3. So if you drop a 4th time in battle, you would instantly die when you go back down.
Okay, so this is beautiful because this now all of a sudden adds a level of desperation,
urgency. Yes.
Love that.
Yes.
Love
and that, because if I drop, at a wounded 2, my next turn, I'm making a save that could be my last save.
Yes.
See, I think that okay, we're all afraid to die. I would say that if I took a survey of everyone that I walk up to in the next 2 days, most people are afraid to die.
Most people
are afraid to die. Okay, so if I'm going to play my character realistically and I'm invested in that character, I'd like to think I'd be afraid, and I have been afraid that my player character could die. So these are the types of things that help elevate the sensation of realism.
Yeah, the impact.
Of death inside of that space. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, think about like how, from like a player's perspective, how tense it's going to be when you're on that wounded 2 and you're like, all right, I'm going to run or am I going to hit? Imagine you like go to hit and you're like, this is it. And it's just like, your character's like throwing everything into it.
Right.
And
So can I add something to this then?
No.
Because, and I know you want to talk a little bit about Daggerheart's mechanics with death, but I want to just go back to bloodied, for example, because in the bloodied condition in 5e, when it comes to a monster, it also talks about, rather than it just being this location for information for someone to say, oh, they're at half their hit points or below, you can also apply mechanics once bloodied has been crossed. So for example, an adult red dragon immediately recharges its fire breath and must use it against the creature who bloodied it.
That's so cool.
That's gonna tear the roof off of combat, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm fighting an adult red dragon and I know that if my next strike with my axe is gonna take it down below half of its hit points and put it in bloodied, I'm going to get hurt. And think about it, why that makes sense. Because if you're a creature and all of a sudden you've experienced a wound that pushes you past a certain level, you're going to react to that.
Yeah.
Like it also says that an Aarakocra could potentially have or use a flight reaction. It says, as a reaction to being bloodied, it immediately moves half its speed or its full speed in flight. Brilliant, because it's like, I hit a bird, the bird is going to fly. Yeah. Right. It's going to try and move out.
Yeah. It's a reaction. It's a, an intense moment of being brought to, half of your life.
Right. Because the goal for all of these things, player characters or monsters, is to survive. They don't toss themselves into battle all the time for no reason. There's reasons for going to battle. And in battle, your instinct is to survive. So if you hit a point where you feel like survival might no longer be an option, you're going to change your persona. You might start screaming at the people across from you. You might be like, I'm out of here. And you might run. Like bloodied might cause people to flee. Bloody might cause people to negotiate terms.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Not everybody's fighting to the death.
Exactly. Exactly. So
that's so interesting.
So what about Daggerheart? I'm curious about death in Daggerheart. We've played it before. I love Daggerheart's death mechanics.
It's super interesting. So Daggerheart is the first of these death mechanics that gives you options as a player. So when you are brought below your hit point maximum, you have 3 options. Death, but you can go out in a blaze of glory and automatically critical hit. So pretty much like one final heroic thing you can go out and do, which I thoroughly enjoy. Nothing like going out like a hero, baby. Fate, which is basically you can roll the dice with 50-50 chance of living or dying. So you roll the dice and you either get your full hit points back, I believe, or you fully die. So you're kind of like trading there. Or an injury or a setback. The PC lives, but there is some kind of cost / permanent injury sustained. And I think that these 3 options just give you so much flavor to play with. Because not every character is going to choose the same thing. No.
I mean, you might have that, big-headed player character at the table. It's like, my last, hurrah is I'm going to swing at this creature.
Yeah. And if I can kill it with me, like, fuck yeah.
You might be saving the rest of your party by taking out this creature. That last, you're right there.
But I would also say that it's contextual. Hopefully it's contextual, right? So certain ones of those might be more appropriate in certain situations. If the battle is underwhelming, Blaze of Glory probably is not going to be the option that fits the story.
Exactly.
The best. So,
but if you're like protecting someone and it's super important and it's kind of like BBEG type stuff, you're gonna go out and do that. And think of the impact that has, the way you're gonna be honored.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, maybe half the rest of your party is down and they're, they didn't choose that scenario. Yeah. And you're just, you're trying to save that last person, or you're trying to save your party from being totally wiped out.
Yeah.
Go out in that blaze of glory.
The question is the blaze of glory, or then do you roll the dice to see if you get your full hit points back?
I don't know.
With the downside of it being completely underwhelming and everybody dies.
So if we add a level to this, because this is, like as I've always said, I want to make this as meaningful and as urgent as possible. As both of you know, in my games that I DM, death is permanent. And I don't mean permanent for your character. Yes, of course, if you find someone who's got that diamond that's worth tens of thousands of gold and they can cast True Resurrection, fine. Bring your character back. We know how hard that is to do. Or possibly Scroll of Revivify. You can get your character back. Fine. Those things still apply. But if you die in my game, you are gone as a player.
You die in real life.
You die in real life in my game.
You.
You're out of Three Ducks Tavern. You're gone. And I do that. I do that to sort of, I hope, invoke a level of eliminating recklessness, potentially getting people to invest in their characters a little bit more. And I know, Rich, you're like,
look at me, don't look at me.
You're guilty on a couple of
eliminating recklessness. I don't know if that worked.
No. But what it does do, I mean, and to be totally fair, I'm not a complete asshole when it comes to being a DM. I don't want my friends to leave the table forever.
Yeah.
Right? So there are very, very difficult to encounter ways that you can get back to the table. And we don't need to go into all of those now. I don't need to explain my game to everybody.
Yeah, we haven't lived it yet.
No.
So
let's hope we don't have to.
Yeah, let's hope. But
the point is that if there was a level of urgency to your death built into gameplay, established from session 0 forward, and now you're trying to choose the context of whether or not you're going to go for full hit points or full death, what another layer to add to that decision-making process.
True. 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting. I love it so much.
But bringing in now, like, let's switch it a little bit. Did you have anything else to add to Daggerheart?
That's kind of
That's
it.
pretty much it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So I was gonna say, let's circle back to what we do at our table, because the agency of death and possibly being out of the game, like you said, there's ways back in, but not as easy. The suspense of death, we've at our table have put it in the hands of the DM,
Right.
Where our roles are hidden from the other players at the table and yourself.
Well, you're talking about the death save rolls.
The death save rolls.
Yes.
If you are downed in combat, the death save rolls you're making.
Right.
DM is making.
So in our game, let's put this into context, though. Let's talk about why I made this decision. This decision. If you fall unconscious in combat, you are swimming in a soup of the ethereal. You're in a dream state, or you're just blacked out. You are unaware of whether or not you're going to come back to consciousness or whether you are going to die. You could be in a coma. You've been whacked to the point of not being able to be conscious. Okay. My thinking there is, one, if I'm making your death saves, you're scared out of your mind because you have no idea where you're going to go. I could look up at you at any second and say, Rich, the envelopes of the afterlife begin to open in front of you as the choruses from the heavens above begin to sing. Could you describe for us what you see in your dream state as you pass from this existence to nothingness? Holy shit, what a way to kind of force you right into like, oh my God, I just died. But I know this is problematic for a lot of reasons.
Yeah. And to, just to add on to what you were saying, if it's the opposite of keeping the rolls on the table and your fellow players know, Rich, he's got 2 successes. He's fine.
We're not going to go over there and try and stabilize him.
He's got 2 successes, 0 failures. He's fine.
Right.
Don't worry about him.
Urgency.
There's no urgency to it. There's no there's no mystery. They're out in the open. Yeah, I've rolled an 18. I've rolled a 16. I'm good over here, guys. They continue to fight. Where in real life, you don't know if that person's about to take their last breath or not. There's going to be an urgency. You want to help that person. You want to, heal the person. Whereas if you see those rolls, there's no mystery to it. There's
This is the first real place where D&D death saving throws are broken, right? I feel. Yeah. So we try to find a homebrew solution that is somewhere between my total authoritarian I'm rolling for you, which may or may not be the best solution, I agree, and this kind of completely transparent on the table, oh, he's going to be fine. What do we do?
Well, I think that there's this nice middle ground where you tell us, this is it. I'm going to roll this in front of everybody. This last one matters.
Oh.
Oh, that's interesting. So wait, I've already made a series of throws for you. Could be as many as four. In theory, because I had 2 saves and 2 failures. And then I stop on your next turn and say to the whole group. Interesting.
Or you just stand up, you give us all a look, and you roll it out here.
Ooh, that's intense. I love the
I've never
drama
thought
there.
about that one there.
I love
You
that.
you don't even know
thought
if
about
it's good
Oof.
or if it's bad.
That's a great idea.
Oh, wow.
Because at that moment when the DM stands, the DM might be standing all the
Something's
time
happening.
anyway. Something's going on.
Something's going to happen.
Okay.
Because your job is to make us as stressed and as impacted as possible, right?
Right.
So you taking the early ones that don't mean anything is fine. But us doing it together, because there's nothing like rolling a dice together when you know it means something.
Right. That's true. I kind of like that because that bridges that gap a little bit. The other one that we had was with you rolling them and not being allowed to disclose.
Yes, we tried that for a little while. That was, say, a lot easier when we were playing remotely, because we did play remotely for a little while.
Right.
That was a lot easier. But the other thing is keeping it hidden. Some people might say that leaving the DM to roll your death saves is taking the agency away from the player. You know, you're attached to your player character. But at the same time, you're also in an unconscious state. You can't do anything about it. But, I get attached to my dice. You get attached to your dice. You have a relationship with that. You have a relationship with the player character that you're playing. If you give it into the hands of the DM, it's like, okay, well, they fucked up my death saving rolls, or whatever. But if you keep it to yourself and secretly let the DM know somehow, there's multiple ways to look at it. That's why that's why we're kind of debating about this.
I completely disagree with that, though.
Oh, go for it.
Completely disagree with that. I think that in that moment, you are not responsible. The only reason you want agency over your character is because you're making actions like you do in real life, and you know best what your character would do. When you're unconscious, there are no actions to make.
Well, it's like how Todd described it in the beginning. You are in a state of you don't know. Yeah. You're unconscious, essentially.
Totally. But even just like in real life, like when we go unconscious, it's out of our hands.
I will admit, though, and I'm not necessarily advocating for keeping it into the player's hands, because that was an idea that I saw online.
Yeah.
That people might have an issue with that. There might be certain people at the table that, aren't happy with the DM making the rolls. But I'll admit, I've been in the scenario before where Todd is making my rolls. I am down. I know nothing. And I've also been in a scenario where no one else is around to save me. So it was the most intense scenario I've ever been in one of the games.
Yeah.
Where I don't know what those rolls are. I don't know if I'm about to die. And I actually really preferred that he was doing them.
Oh, because that makes me feel good. Because
it keeps it such a mystery, and I have no idea. I'm sitting over there, heart pounding. It made a connection to my character and my, what we are doing here.
Well, what makes me feel great about that is that means, number one, you're invested in your character, which is what I want. Number two, I've somehow, with all of you, built a world that is meaningful, right? That's the magic.
Yeah.
Now, I have to say that, and I'm on the fence about this whole thing about taking player agency and rolling the dice for them, but if I give that to you and you are now rolling your death saving throws, but you're not telling the other players, there's going to come this blunt point in the storyline, in the fiction, where one of my players looks up at me after they roll that death saving throw and they're just like, I'm dead. And it kind of is this anticlimactic, very blunt, oh.
Yeah.
Unless, like Nathan did in our Daggerheart game, it launches into this whole self-induced narrative that is heart-wrenching and dramatic, which was brilliant, but not everybody's going to do that. And so I think at that point, I guess I've got a meter, okay? And my meter is always, is what we're doing, is the meter in the realm of dice mechanics and analytical, or is the meter in the realm of the fiction, the storyline, and the role play?
Yeah.
And I know that that meter's always going to fluctuate in any game. It has to. That's the whole way the game is played.
Yeah.
But I think death is far more important than a simple persuasion roll to see if I'm going to be able to buy a potion cheaper from a shop merchant.
100%. Yeah. And I think there are a lot, launching into the next thing I have written down, there are a lot of ways that role play itself can make death feel so much more impactful. Like you were kind of talking beforehand, let's say you get this final strike landed on you and you have flashbacks to some of the most important parts of your life that maybe shed you in a different light that people didn't see most of the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you're describing a scenario maybe you're not, fully dead yet. I can understand, like, if you are dying, this is your last, what are your last words or what are your last things? But if you're unconscious there and you're waiting to get healed or something, I like that idea.
You could be going through a memory.
Yeah.
So, because even though you're missing out on the fun of combat, you're getting to expose some part of your backstory that a lot of people don't know.
Right. Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's really true. I love that. Another thing that and again, investment in backstory is investment in character, right? So if you are fully invested in your character, and if death is going to be a painful thing for you, then you should be able to sort of rip from the bag as many things that character held on to that the party both knew and did not know to lay on the table in those final moments.
Oh man, it's like making me emotional here. That's beautiful, bro.
No,
that's awesome.
It is, but that brings more of a sense of reality into it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're getting very deep in your character.
Yeah. And let's say you maybe that doesn't happen, but you still want to give it a thematic presence in your story. As a DM, give the players a chance to have a funeral or some kind of send off.
If a player does die.
If a player does die, and let the characters themselves in character speak, and then give off their final, words and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I like that.
I totally agree on that.
And not only does that add closure to the story, but it helps the story going forward because you acknowledged it. It made it such an integral part of the story that going forward, people will have motivations because of it. And possibly you'd be able to reintroduce a new character for that real player.
Yeah.
In consequence to that.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, remember what happened with our character Wretch?
Yes.
When Wretch died, we did have a rite of passage.
Yeah, we essentially, we did a send-off. We did a,
buried him and all that.
Yeah, we did a whole, remembrance,
And what was beautiful about that is it being the Strahd campaign, Wretch was able to be brought back as an undead.
Yeah.
There was a lot of potential for both the send-off and the ways in which people spoke about Wretch's character for there to be a sort of living on in a sense.
Yeah. I like that idea of bringing meaningfulness into the death.
Yeah.
I mean, at our table, I guess you hope that you're making relationships with the players that you're playing with in game, the player characters, and death should matter. Like losing a party member should matter.
Yeah.
So can we just kind of go back to something here? Because I think that, you mentioned earlier, either before we started the show or in the show, I can't remember, it doesn't matter. You were talking about ways in which the downed hit breaks all of this mechanic. Meaning I'm down and I take a hit. Let's talk about that really quickly.
So, we should circle back really quick to the basic rules.
Okay.
Because in the basic rules, if you are unconscious and you're making the death saving rolls, if you take any damage while you're at 0 hit points, you suffer a death saving failure. If the damage is a critical hit or you are hit with a melee combat, it counts as a critical hit, and it's 2 failures on your spectrum of 3 successes or failures.
Right. So to put this into context, I'm down.
Yep.
I'm unconscious. I have not made a death saving throw yet, but the monster who, isn't going to accept the fact that I'm merely unconscious comes in with a second blow. Because I'm down, it's automatically a critical hit, right? Because it is.
Yep.
And that critical hit creates 2 death save fails.
Yep.
So I'm 2/3 of the way to the grave at this point. Go ahead.
Yes. So bringing a homebrew aspect into it is the fact that taking damage and auto fails, it's a little broken because the way that it's written, if you take any damage, you fail 1 save. If you take a stab from a little goblin, it's 2 fails. But if a bugbear comes and smashes you with a club, it's still the same 2 fails.
Right.
But on the same aspect of that, someone throws a rock at me or a tree branch hits me, it's a fail.
Right.
Not based on damage. It's just
automatic.
Where
We know it's an easy fix for that.
what?
You add the thresholds like you would in the auto death. So like when the damage goes below 0, your maximum hit points, you die. So let's say 1/3 of that, you get 1 fail. If you do 2/3, you get 2 fails. And if you go up to if that damage while you're down goes up to the bone, you're dead.
He just brought that up because that then scales based on your level. Because the thing that I saw bringing this up was a DM created a chart where it was essentially 0 to 25 points. Because, you get hit by a fireball, it's still only 1 fail, but that's much worse than being hit by a pebble.
Yeah.
Which would be 2 because
the scaling, the scaling is just off. Where he came up with the idea of like 0 to 25, it's 1, 25 to 50, it's 2, 50 plus auto death type thing. But that works perfect because he was like, that's, I'm playing with my characters at level 10. So 25 to 50 hit points is a good number for 2. And but that's perfect because if it scales based on hit points, I mean, that's almost a Daggerheart threshold type thing.
Yeah. Just combining
based on how many hit points you would take.
Yeah.
But that works perfect. That if you scale it based on your essentially or your bloodied condition or versus your, auto death condition.
And if it's below your minor threshold, it's not going to affect your rolls.
Right.
To get back up.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you can mess with that concept.
And I want to point out, I think from a mechanics point of view, when it comes to running a game and you have combatants, monsters, adversaries attacking a party, it's so easy to sort of say, oh, that person attacked that monster, and that monster doesn't feel the urge to seek revenge on that person. So let's say that monster now drops that player to 0 hit points, right? And there's a direct engagement between that monster and that player goes down. That monster isn't done in my book. That monster's going to hit over and over again.
Yeah.
And so, there's this automatic assumption, I think, on the part of D&D games that once players drop to 0, they're going to start rolling their death saves. And now there's this whole other game mechanic that kicks in and allows you to see, ooh, do I die? But, I'm a big fan of Keith Ammon's book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. And I feel like, no, that monster's going to make sure you are done.
They're going to double tap you, man.
That's right. And I've done that before in games, and players turn and look at me and they're like, what are you doing? You're hitting me again? What do you hate my guts? Do you want me to? No, this is combat.
Yeah. See, that's hard to say because it's like, does the monster know? Like, you fell. Does the monster know you're making death saves?
Not at all.
But there's other players that are hitting that monster. So what is that monster going to do?
Oh,
because I can argue it both ways. It's like, I get it. If you were fighting a mage, they know you're not dead yet. And they might hit you again. To me, if you're fighting a bear, a wolf, I think that wolf's moving on to a different threat.
Well, it depends on the creature. Oh, a bear or a wolf loses its interest after the creature goes unconscious.
That's what I'm thinking.
But if it's like a kobold, and it then depends on the level to which you affected the kobold.
Yeah.
Then it gets an emotional response.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's very up in the air.
It's contextual
It is.
for certain.
It is.
Yeah.
However, I do think that given, the condition of the combatant, are they in fight or flight mode because they've been bloodied? Mm-hmm. Are they super defensive and almost in a full state of hysteria where they're just going to want to rip through it? There could be a reason to do that.
Yeah.
So, and listen, I want to make it perfectly clear here that one of the things we haven't talked about in this episode are things like revivify, resurrection, bringing you back, which we're going to do as a completely separate podcast because that is an entirely different ball of wax.
Yeah. Resurrection, bringing people back, that is a whole separate scenario.
And like the funeral that you had mentioned in sort of helping to fill out the sort of investment players have in their characters, the notion of resurrection is a complicated one. It's not just like, bing, you're back.
It is in the rules.
It is in the rules, but it shouldn't be in the game.
Yeah, of course.
Last thing I want to talk about before we go, and that is this idea that when you're down, and you become stabilized or you do become able to engage in other words, you haven't died, right? But you've been unconscious and you come back. I like this idea where you're coming back with some kind of marker that says, I don't agree with this notion that the cleric hits you for 8 points of healing and all of a sudden you're back up swinging your axe again and you're back to normal. I feel like it needs to come with a consequence.
Yeah. Is the consequence a point of exhaustion? Or is a consequence of flavor of the DM to where you got hit?
I think it could be either.
That's what I was just going to say. I think it could be either. I'm pretty sure out there are types of wound charts and etc. that, if you fell unconscious in that battle, maybe you come up with some kind of wound that, maybe you need to spend time with a healer or something to really fix that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that, reduces your ability to swing your lowers your ability score.
Well, a point of exhaustion. A point of exhaustion
can
helps.
do that too. Yeah.
But imagine also if there's like a really pressing danger and your party's like, all right, we need to run, but then they get you up and your leg is snapped in half.
I was just gonna say, what if you took a massive hit? Let's go back to the example of the bear. The bear just bit the shit out of your arm. Are you going to be able to swing that as well in the next battle? Swing your greatsword at something if your arm's all mauled up? I know there's everything's magical in this world, and the cleric's going to go touch you, and everything is perfectly fine. But I think that takes the severity out of damage and death and being downed in combat. And we can talk about that all day long because you've brought it up.
Yeah.
Have it just. You magically wake up the next day, everything's perfectly fine, nothing happened.
And this, I think, is going to be part of the episode that we do on reviving.
Death,
and we have a listener actually in Germany who says, yeah, please, I hate it as a DM that after they get up, they can use all their shit again. Like, hello, you just got effed up. And that's so right. So one solution I think that could be cool for that is, we have critical fail Bibles, right? You roll a nat 1 on an attack. It's like, open the critical fail Bible, roll a D100. What happened? Did your weapon break? Did you damage another party member? Well, what if there is a consequence chart that for when you come back from 0 hit points, now there is this. And maybe it's a simple roll on a table where we can get creative with the different choices, which I think could be cool.
I just had an interesting one. Imagine you're like a mage, right? And you get knocked unconscious, but like, let's say you took a hammer to the head. You're not going to remember your somatic components to say the spell.
Right. Right. You might be slurring your speech, which
Yeah.
could make it impossible to properly execute a spell.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant one. And I love the creativity of that.
Yeah.
I think this is a place where we could really
You could have to make an intelligence check to see, almost like a concentration check.
Yes.
Can you cast that spell?
That's great. I
man.
love that.
You could expand on this so much.
Yeah. Agreed.
But that's what's cool about homebrew rules, right?
Yeah.
This could be, you could complex the shit out of this.
Yeah.
But that's what brings severity into the system.
Right. I feel like that's the whole thing. For me, it's all about where do we find meaning? Death has got to be one of the most meaningful or potentially meaningful spaces inside of this game. How do we build that out to up the stakes? It's about the stakes.
Yeah. Because if you don't have those consequences, honestly, the way that the rules are written,
There's no stakes.
there are no stakes. You can just run into that room. I got a healer. He can bring me back up. Most likely I'm perfectly fine.
Right.
And you can just, go in there, no consequences, not even thinking about it. But it's like, if there's consequences, you could come out of this battle with a permanent wound or, not able to finish out the day or something like that. And you could be causing an issue with the rest of your party.
The way it's written, it kind of feels like in gym class where you played that game where it's like some form of like tag or like capture the flag, where like, all right, you run across an enemy lines and you get tagged, then you got to go wait in jail, and your cleric runs up and just tags you and you're free.
You're perfectly free.
Well, yeah, and I actually have another one that I can sort of, and we really should wrap this podcast up, and I want to end on this note because I love what you just said, and I think this actually applies to that.
Yeah.
If you have ever gambled for real money, whether it's a casino or your local poker game, and you've had your own money on the table in a situation that has urgency, right? The next time somebody says, hey, do you want to play poker for M&Ms? You're like, no, I don't want to play poker for M&Ms because M&Ms are totally not meaningful. So that's a good place to sort of, not to bring gambling into this, but that's
Always bring gambling.
right? Always bring gambling in.
No, I agree. You've got to bring the reality into it.
Yeah, you've got to
stake?
up those stakes.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we are going to wrap this one up today on Death and Dying. We will eventually do a podcast based around revivify and resurrection and bringing someone back to life, as well as this notion that our listener brought up about how when you do come back from consciousness or finish a long rest, because God knows if you've been brought down to 0 hit points and you've broken limbs or you've been stabbed and you wake up the next day and you're fine, this just doesn't track for me.
No, doesn't make sense.
All right, everybody, listen, we will see you next time. Thanks again for watching. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later. All right, take care, everybody.
See ya.
Adios.
All right, everybody, iCast Guidance is produced by Todd and Garret Brennan. Head over to YouTube, where we can be found at Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can see the production of this podcast every Sunday morning live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're looking forward to seeing you there.